The next chapter, chapter 4, is by Brian Balknight. He was the host of the first DRUAT National Conferences. He was the first one that I was sent to tell him the good news. No, it was not that Christ was born. The good news was that you're going to host a national conference at your church and you're going to pay for it. And Brian did. We focused that first conference on Brian's book, which was Bodybuilding, and it talked about the team building through spiritual gifts. Brian was a minister of one of the large membership churches, was one of the first leaders of the first time pastor at the large membership church, wrote several books, provided great leadership as a teaching church to several other churches in the area, and was specifically known for teaching at that point an online Bible study and doing a continuing education course for Drew through the internet. So he was really cutting edge, because this is, back in the late 90s, early 2000, and that was pretty cutting edge stuff, especially for somebody who was in between my age and my father's age. He was that same generation. And for a pastor at that point to be doing these cutting edge things, I thought was really quite unique, especially looking not to hire other full-time clergy when, to be honest, the large membership church measured their success as a pastor by how many staff they had reporting to. And he was purposefully not hiring professional clergy, but was hiring laypersons out of the laity, training them, and then empowering them to do ministry. I found it absolutely fascinating to work with Brian. He makes the whole point in his presentation that by focusing on spiritual gifts and understanding the spiritual gifts, you can build your ministry team to meet the needs of a congregation, because God has already put the people who need to provide leadership in lay ministry in place and already given them the spiritual gift if it is a needed ministry in your church. Not a desired ministry, not a popular ministry, not a ministry designed to bring people in. If it is a needed ministry, the spiritual gifts will already be present, and God will already be working in the life of that person, calling them to do that ministry. The role of the pastor then is to discern the need and to encourage the individual to respond to their call to ministry. And so he provides a very honest snapshot of what his ministry was like at Christ United Methodist Church in Bethel Park, right outside of Pittsburgh. The goal of the church was to be an open and hospitable community of believers, eager to invite everyone to connect with God and follow Jesus. Now, they had employed staff, and he works his way through all the places he had been and all the staff that he had, and then talk very specifically about the Apostle Paul's way of doing church and focusing specifically on spiritual gifts. So on page 106, he lists out Romans 12, 6 through 8, 1 Corinthians 12, 14, 1 through 12, and Ephesians 4, 7 through 13, listing all of the spiritual gifts: prophecy, ministry, teaching, exhortation, generosity, leadership, compassion, healing, worker of miracles, prophecy again, discernment of spirits, various kinds of tongues, interpretation of tongues, utterance of wisdom, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. And talks about how he worked his way through understanding how that works within the life of the church. He stated he was amazed at the way God works in the church through this ancient modern understanding of church. Many leaders and countless ministries, I love this word, emerge. They're not planned for. They're not sought after. They emerge. How do they emerge? Out of the gifts and graces that God has given to God's people. How are they identified? The role of the ordained pastor, in Brian's view, is to be one of discernment, to understand what those gifts are, to understand what those needs are, and then provide the encouragement and the training to do that. So the process of incorporating membership into staff leadership becomes a primary role of the pastor. And he also talked about expanding the vision for spiritual gifts. Equipping laity for authentic, fulfilling, and God-honoring ministry may be the most important task of our time. changes what it means to be a member of that kind of church. Because transformation in Brian's chapter is going to be different than transformation in Christine's chapter, because the transformation in Brian's chapter is recognizing what it is that God has given you, and then calling you to use it, and expecting your life to be different as a result. So Brian talks about how through his ministry he called people out, and he talks about gifts for the people of God, the spiritual gifts, and you don't get to choose your gift. I love that whole point. You don't get to choose your gift. Yet that's what God expects you to use. And he had a lot of influence. He was influenced quite a bit, rather, by the Willow Creek model. Because according to the Willow Creek model, approximately 24 gifts remain highly visible and appropriate in the life of today's believing community. And he specifically kind of rejected or moved past that and said that it's God who discerns and determines what those spiritual gifts are, not what are the most popular for a period of time. We shouldn't be distinguishing or discriminating among either the gifts or the persons. Prefer to think as clergy leaders as the vision planters regarding spiritual gifts in the congregation. Ordained clergy are not the sole proprietors of the spiritual gift. They're the ones who help identify what spiritual gifts are so that people can discover the spiritual gift that already resides within them. That's a pretty dynamic model there. He talks about how you can plan your entire church around that, and how they did that with a very special thing, and how they utilize a humorous and helpful video introduction from Willow Creek senior minister Bill Hybel. So he understands and appreciates the Willow Creek model of spiritual gifts, but also makes it slightly different, which I think is the difference between a model and a notion. It's fine to take from the Willow Creek, but he also had some things he was doing different. That's contextualization of ministry. And he lays out what those sessions are, and in pure institutional church fashion, there are 4 sessions. There are 4 weeks in a month. It's a month-long program. See how that works? So I'm not sure I like that part of his presentation as much. But he also talks about the church as a deployment center, and really focuses on ministry should be about sending people out. Even Jesus did that with the disciples. Of course, what happens when Jesus sent the disciples out? Did they get it right the first time? No. So there is this concern about perfection in the modern church that you need to get over in lay ministry, and need to look for ways to be in a free-to-fail model of ministry. Not everything has to work every time. Brian kind of ends things by saying he believes that there are sufficient spiritual gifts in every church to do what God is calling that church to do in this particular moment of time, which means that not all ministries last forever. Just as Jessica believed they could start at any time and end at any time, that the spiritual gifts are there for this particular period of time. Thank you.